All right. Thank you so much for joining me here on Sunvalley News. Now, we're speaking with a concerned parent, Bonnie McBride. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now, you have some concerns over the school District 73 and how well they're equipped to help your daughter who has FASD. Can you explain a little bit more about some of your concerns?
You bet. Thank you for having me. So, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is one of the most prevalent neurodiversities that we have here in Canada, but we're a little bit behind in terms of being able to meet the needs of those children and the adults that have it as well, and accommodate that style and that brain injury. So, we have been fighting since my daughter Celine entered kindergarten to make sure that she was able to access her education in an inclusive way, in a meaningful way, and in a way that meets her needs and keeps her safe and healthy. And as we've progressed through, she's just entered middle school. We're still fighting those same battles, even though like we're in our 8th year. It's so challenging and exhausting for us.
Can you share some of the challenges that you guys have had to fight against?
One of the biggest ones is the number of times the school district or school district staff have asked us to actually remove her from the school district so that there isn't maybe a role for her in public education. And parents of kids with really diverse or complex needs get this message over and over and over again across the province. And it's done in a way that sometimes I think people are well-meaning, teachers who are trying to see if you know there are other options, but sometimes it's because they're just tired of trying to meet your needs. And so you're told, hey, have you considered private school? Have you considered homeschool? Would you like to just bring her 2 hours a day? What would you like me to do with her for the rest of the time? Right? Like I work. How am I to do that? And taking care of Celine is a really big job. And so when she's at school, how do I be her mom and her nurse and her case manager and her secretary and her mom, just her mom, and be her teacher too? How do I develop that attachment with my adopted daughter when you're asking me to fill every role in her life? So the biggest challenge we find is repeatedly being asked to hold her out, hold her back, pull her out. And then after that, it's, well, she can come, but maybe she's not going to be able to participate, right? She doesn't do choir. We pulled her out of her first elementary school when we found out they had her mostly sitting in the hallway when the other kids were doing their activities. And that's not fair. So it's been like that the whole time.
You know, I connected with you because it struck a personal chord with me. I was diagnosed with ADHD later on in life, but that school system was not set up for me to succeed. You know, it talked too much, doesn't pay attention, and all my grades, you know, I was excelled in arts, but mathematics and sciences, not so great. And then that transition, I ended up moving from, you know, junior high to high school to a whole new community, and it just felt like there was just not enough support for people like me. And I think it had long lasting effects because it wasn't until my 30s that I realized that I was capable of so much more, that I was intelligent. And it sounds like the school system is still having those same challenges when I was in school in the 90s. Now we're here at 2021 going into 22. And it sounds like it's still the same challenges. What needs to be done in order to have people like myself and your daughter and other people with, you know, disabilities to succeed?
Well, lots needs to be done, and a lot of it comes down to money. But one of the things that the province is looking at and parents continue to advocate for is to break away some of that red tape. So when your child begins to present challenges, say they're 3 years old and you start to see the daycare starts calling or the preschool and they're like, wow, your son, he just can't settle into the lesson. We can't seem to engage with him, or he falls apart at the seams every time something goes wrong. Maybe you should see a doctor. Then it takes 8 months to see a pediatrician. And then it takes sometimes up to 3 years to get an assessment for a diagnosis. The reason that's important is because without the diagnosis, The school district doesn't get any money from the Ministry of Education to support the child. So we need to move away from this diagnosis-based or diagnosis-centric model for service, where if a child presents needs, the child receives support with or without a diagnosis, and maybe even with or without the right diagnosis. Children who are diagnosed with FASD in BC do not receive additional supplemental services like children who have autism or children who have Down syndrome and qualify for the at-home program. These kids can't go in the Special Olympics. It's just this little gray area. So they fall through the cracks. And the pressure put on the family to meet the needs by themselves is enormous. So we need to get away from that diagnosis-based piece and just meet children and families where they are, meet their needs first, worry about figuring out exactly why that child has those additional needs second.
What can teachers do to help you?
Educate themselves.
Yeah.
I met a teacher in June when I was picking up some school supplies for my daughter who had a child with FASD going into her classroom next week, and she had never had any training and she had never met a child with FASD. And he was about to enter her classroom. There are provincial programs that educators and social workers can take about FASD, and almost none of them have had enrollment in the last 3 years. So districts need to push their staff to do that additional training, that continuing education, and so does the province. It needs to be an expectation of people.
Mandatory training.
Mandatory training. The number of people that have approached my child at school, number of adults who have asked her to do things she is physically incapable of and set the expectation that if she doesn't do it, there'll be punishment is staggering. Because she can't. She shuts down. Her brain does not work the same way as my brain works or your brain works. There are both chemical and physical differences to her brain. She is unable to move as quickly through a scenario as we are. She needs that time. And she's not given that time. And so then she falls apart and she either explodes or she runs away. And then she's blamed.
How do you feel about segregating kids into special schools?
That's an interesting question. And it's a big question because a long time ago, we did segregate people with differences. And I think the pendulum had swung a really long, far way over here where we said, look, you've got a child or a person in your family that has incapacity, so we're going to write them off. And then we swung a long way the other way where it's like, we're going to put everybody in the same classroom and they belong there. But my child can't function in a classroom of 30 kids ever. With any amount of support. So in order, if we say in the global picture, we want her just to be connected to the community, there are going to be some skills and some opportunities that she connects to in a segregated way in order to gain enough knowledge to integrate when she wants to. So we can't expect her to inclusion doesn't mean that she's there no matter what. Inclusion means that we give her space to be part of our community in the way that best suits her. So our definition of inclusion, I think we get hung up on all the little spaces instead of looking at it in a really big picture. Our goal for Celine is that she's a healthy member of our community as an adult. We have to work towards that. And that means making sure she's connected to her community now. If she can only connect to her peers through a regular classroom and a regular Girl Guides program and regular swimming lessons, it means she won't be successful. We have to make adaptations.
And what can people do to start advocating for change in the school system? How can people support you in your fight?
It's interesting because at this time of year, you see a lot of social media posting and memes and all that kind of stuff about making sure your children are accepting of students with special needs or differences. But that hasn't been, in our experience, the group of people that need to do that check-in. It's those adults. it's the other parents and girl guides. And when your girl guide comes home and says, Celine just wouldn't stop talking on the silent walk, that parent needs to not go to the girl guide leader and say, we don't want Celine in girl guides. They need to go to their student and say, it must be really hard for Celine to do that walk if she doesn't seem to be able to settle into it.
Oh,
So it's parents.
amazing.
Yeah, right. We need to check ourselves as adults. We were not raised in an inclusive space, right? That's not how we were raised, and so we need to check ourselves and come to that space. And when you see a special needs parent advocating at that provincial level, asking their MLA or their community for support, you need to get in behind them.
Now, do you think this is an issue that is a Kamloops and area issue, or is this happening all around?
It's happening all around. And we're actually quite fortunate in Kamloops, or in our school district anyways, that we have some really strong advocates here. So we have come a long way. The Chris Rose Center for Autism here was started by a parent many years ago who came here from back east. We're actually quite a ways ahead, and we're still nowhere where we need to be. If you're in a rural community, in a remote community, in a northern community, you have a much harder road to hoe than I do.
Absolutely. What would you want people to know about your daughter?
She's the hardest working kid you'll ever meet. We tell when we meet with her team, wherever we're going, whether it's school or an after school program or at the hospital even, we tell them she's not going to be the most likable kid, but she is going to be the hardest working person here, because just to be here is more work for her than you'll ever experience because of her issues with sensory integration and things like that. She very much wants to be a part of her community, and she wants to do good. She wants to help. She was deeply touched by the death of George Floyd, and she did a lot of work around that initiative and making sure that our community was inclusive. She's a huge LGBTQ advocate. She wants to be a part of her community and do good. We just need to embrace that.
That's awesome. Well, Celine, you have a new fan right here.
Thank you.
You bet. What can, if just to wrap things up, people are touched by your story and want to help to support you, what can we do?
The first thing to do is to check in with our Facebook page. So a group of parents of children, parents and supporters of children with FASD have created a new society here in BC called Inspire Kids, so that we can start to bring these families into our fold in BC. If you can like and share our page and just stay aware of these kinds of issues, and when you see us up front and pushing hard, come with us.
All right. Bonnie, thank you so much for joining us here on Sunvalley News.
Thank you.